Welcome, everybody. My name is Bill Spangler-Dunning, and this is Doc Talks, which is a ministry of the Virginia region, and I serve as the regional minister there. But this is a ministry we hope would serve the whole church, and every time we meet on a Monday, we engage a topic that we hope is beneficial to the whole church. Today's topic is around the mental health initiative from the National Benevolent Association, and our two guest hosts are Angela Whittenhill and Mark Poindexter, and they're going to say some words like always, but remember, Doc Talks is also about conversation. So start thinking of your questions now, and as they finish their opening words, they will be welcoming of any questions that you have. So I love our extra guest. I'm going to introduce Angela now to introduce the NBA Initiative Program.
Thank you. It is good to see all of you, and thank you in advance for my 7-month-old joining us. Give him a bottle just to keep him quiet right now. But it is a pleasure, and just so grateful that we're thinking about this in this moment. My name is Angela Whitenhill Shields, and wanted to share a little bit about NBA for those of you who don't know. The National Benevolent Association is your health and social service ministry, general ministry of the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. And we partner with congregations, regions, general ministries, a variety of health and social service agencies across the life of the church to think about what it means to create communities of compassion and care, to come alongside all of you doing innovative health and social service ministry and whatnot. You'll find a lot of amazing resources on our website, nbacares.org. And one of them I wanted to stress and point out today, if you haven't heard, we have just posted our latest pandemic response grants information. So please check that out to see if it applies to you. It's offering relief to ministries who have been detrimentally impacted by the pandemic, and also those of you who are starting new ministries and services for those impacted. And so it's good to bring greetings from the National Association staff with you. And I'll quickly just also talk about our mental health initiative and then pass it on to my colleague. The mental health initiative is part of our work at NBA. It was created at 2015, the General Assembly, we, as a church, passed a GA 1523 that we wanted to wholeheartedly become opening and affirming for those of us who have mental illness and mental health challenges. And so NBA took that call for creating community and compassion and care very seriously and started the initiative. Since then, we have just been doing different things to help prioritize mental health and give the resources and start conversations like this that are necessary to reduce stigma, that we all might be welcoming that way. And so a lot of what we talk about today on my end comes from that, and you can find more resources there. But I'm most excited to lift up a colleague of mine that we've been working together almost 3 years now on this work. The initiative really brings in disciples across like the church that are specific skills. And so Reverend Poindexter, I would love you to introduce yourself, but has been working with me with the task teams that we do. And so I'll pass it on to introducing yourself.
Isn't that a precious baby she got up there? Isn't that great? Isn't that great? He's part of our meetings now, isn't he, and that's just fun. I'm Mark Poindexter. I'm the pastor here at Westside Christian Church in Fort Smith, Virginia. I've been a disciple pastor since 1989, and most of my career was in Indiana, my home state. I became involved with the mental health initiative, as Angela said, about 3 years ago, because of my willingness to share my story and my own battle with severe depression. Having two bouts in my adult life, one that even led me to have to take a year off of ministry. And that's where I transitioned from Indiana to Virginia. The willingness to share that story is because of the stigma that's related to mental illness. And I want folks, one, to know that they are not alone, and that they also are not disqualified from leadership simply because at times they experience different forms of mental illness. Presently, under Angela's superb guidance, there are two teams that are working. There's an English-speaking team and then a Spanish-speaking team. We are working on the same material, but we're also trying to make it culture-specific as much as possible. What we have done in the past year is move to projects which span a certain amount of time, and we try to get people to work with us for 3 to 4 months on that project. And recently, this past year, with the plan to present this for Mental Health Sunday, which is May 17th, we've been gathering worship resources and creating worship resources out of with the idea of empathy. Empathy as being an important characteristic that can combat the stigma of mental illness. Both myself and my colleague Sarah, who does the Spanish-speaking team, Angela had recruited some folks for us, and we recruited our own. We have developed resources and made resources available, or will be making those resources available. And empathy is a major issue in our country right now, experiencing what it is and some of the leadership that is in place. But we also have put that on hold for the time being, because we feel that we can't just send this out there right now without having it some engagement with our specific situation. And so we are working now to how to create some opportunities within the context of the virus that is happening and what people are experiencing, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, and spiritually in this time, the isolation. I have a deep concern for my fellow pastors. I saw an article recently put on our base camp where we do our work about the pressure to be creative in this time, and how that that can be a lot of pressure in this technological age. And so we're trying to figure out how to support our leadership and then into the churches as well in this unique time.
Amen. Thank you. With that said, I think we wanted to start off by just thinking about mental health in the context of our current experience. And so I encourage you all, if you have thoughts or questions, please write them down. You can raise your hand, we'll pause. But I did want to lift up a few things, general points around mental wellness and mental health, and then go more into specific ideas. And so one of the things I want you to think about, you don't have to answer right now, but when you hear the word mental health, what kind of thoughts come up for you? What emotions come up for you? And you keep those quietly, but just kind of think about those. Excuse us. So oftentimes, if you've thought through some of the things that I think about when I hear that, a lot of times there is something a negative association that comes up with when we say mental health. But the reality is mental health is just health. It really is just like any other part of our health. It's our ability to cope with change and stress, our ability to bounce back after difficulty and after adversity. And mental wellness is the status of good health. It's literally, good, well, being healthy, being well in that way. Put it down real quick. Okay. And so being mentally well is impacted by protective factors and resilient, which are resilient factors or risk factors. And these help us cope with stress and change. It helps us cope or hinders our ability to cope or can worsen our ability to cope. And so I think about that kind of general idea of what mental wellness is, what mental health is. this idea of our good status of being well mentally and emotionally. I think about a pandemic and all the facets of our environment that are now shifted because of that, all the risk factors that we're experiencing because of that, and how we are so adamant about securing our physical wellness right now, down to mask and not touching things, that it's so easy to forget about our mental wellness. And that's not our fault, right? That is the last thing you're thinking about when you're worried about your physical body. And so I want to encourage us to think about our physical body and our mental body together. One of the reasons as to why that's so important is during a crisis moment, we know that most of our mental energy or desire is to at first respond and take agency and to be creative and think about all the ways to fix what's happening around us, which is a beautiful coping skill. When things like disasters or pandemics last longer than what our brain is allowing, there's a natural drop-off point. There's a natural moment where your brain goes, oh my gosh, I'm still inside my house. I'm still not working. My congregation's still not back. And there's only so far our muscle of brain can stay in that suspension. And so after that drop-off, we all do different things to cope with that drop-off. And what I hope today we can think through is, how are we coping? What are we doing? Also, what are we encouraging other people to do and cope in this time? And why that's important is the way we cope has lasting effects. Just like the way we cope physically. For me in my house, we're eating chips and pizza and candy to get through the day. That will be affecting my physical body. The way that I cope mentally affects. These are also subtle changes. Mental wellness is tricky because you don't see it at first, or you might not see the changes at first. And so I want to think about proactively, how do we stay well? And the nice thing is, it helps us maintain some sort of normalcy when we tend to our minds and our emotion. It can help us be productive for those of us who are still working and still needing to be creative, and help us stay healthy physically. The connection of mind and body is so strong in these times. And so I just want to open up with that idea, the general idea of mental wellness and why it's important, particularly now. I'll go ahead and pass it to my colleague on your end.
She passed it to me, and I say ditto on everything Angela just said. One of the things I think is important in this time, when we can tend to have a focus on what we can't do, is try to refocus ourselves on the things we can do. One of the things that I do on a regular basis is go for long walks. When I go for long walks, when the weather's good, when the sun's shining, when I have my puppy with me, that makes a difference for me, not only physically, but mentally, emotionally, and spiritually as well. And it is a time when you can see other people out walking or riding a bicycle, and you can greet them. We of course have to maintain the social distance. But again, we focus sometimes on what we can't do, and I think it's a time to focus on what we can. And even in this difficult time, there are gifts that we are given that we might not recognize unless we focus on what we can do. I'm fortunate to have a tech team in my church, but one of the things we have done, because we can do that, is invite others to share in worship during this time from the congregation, to send in videos of themselves singing or praying. And that has been helpful not only to them, but to other folks to see them as well. So I focused on what we can do. So that's what I would add to what Angela said. That the whole shift, the whole refocusing on what's still possible for us.
Amen. Definitely. That's a great kind of segue to when I think about how our brain works. In times of stress and anxiety, we all do different things. So there's no one size fits all. So one way to start is think about, how do I handle stress in general? What do I do? But more specifically, what is a little bit more, I guess, universal is the needs we may have emotionally in response to this moment. And so I want to think about what you said, Mark, around movement, whether it's getting outside or moving around, that our bodies, those of you who get in your car and drive to your congregation or go to the grocery store, or do these kind of normal things, you're actually moving. One of the biggest concerns of the mental health professional I have, there's a couple, but one is technology right now. I love technology. It's how we're all surviving. But you literally are sitting and you're only using one sense when you do technology. Well, two, hearing. You can hear too, right? But when you're on a technological screen, you're sitting most of the time and you're not moving unless you have a Wii Nintendo or something where you're bouncing around. And you'd be surprised how long in a moment you sit. So for MBA, we all work from home. And so when I first got my work from home job, I had to realize I had to adjust to how long I was sitting. So I encourage you all, it seems minute, to move, to dance, to walk up your stairs, to walk around your house. My mom is walking in her backyard in California, not going outside, but just kind of doing circles, to lift, to stretch as much as you can. It can easily kick your hormones out of a depressed state. My own self, about a week ago, I was stressed and I found myself just getting numb and irritated. And I went for a walk and I came back and was like, oh, that was my body actually slumping into a space. So sometimes it's not even that we're not praying or that we're not, coping mentally. It's just physically we have to move. Another thing that I want to lift up is having intimate conversations with people. Those of us, another concern of mine right now is all of us living alone. And so a lot of us with kids and family, we're stressed out with everybody in the house. And that is also another concern I'll talk about. But really, I think about those of us who don't have physical touch, who don't have a person embodied in front of us. And so some things that you can do if you're living alone is having, when you're on Zoom or call, just really try to have more intimate conversations that make you feel connected in a new way. If you are able to go outside and talk to neighbors far away, try to do that. But really this idea of communicating with animals or with people in a way that can fulfill a part of that we might normally have in our lives. The other last two things I want to think of is, like I said, our other four senses: what we touch, what we hear, what we smell, what we see, we do a lot of on computer, and what we feel. I think it's important that we're constantly aware of all of our five senses being stimulated. Sometimes I turn off my screen and just listen to the services. And it's a very different experience and a very different awareness in my body. That's really important. Or don't talk at all, right? You just go sit in the sun. The last thing I think is going to be helpful to think about is meaning making and how we're making meaning. And so people of faith, meaning making is our jam. We're good at it. People come to us about our meaning. It is what we like to do. In a time of pandemic, it's very hard to do that well without knowledge of how do you make meaning of a pandemic. And so one of the ways I want to encourage us to make meaning, sorry, let me say hello, is actually trying not to avoid making meaning of the big pandemic, that's fine, but really making more meaning of what we need, what we feel like we've lost. And I say that to say, if we can make meaning or understand and process what we're feeling or have void of, we can create substitutes. This is a very practical, kind of spiritual idea. So if I'm really thinking about my family who's in California, who my parents are going to fly out and stay with us and they're not coming, and I'm realizing that is making me sad, that my child's first year is going to be spent inside and can't see his grandparents. And so I'm going to make meaning of that by going, what am I losing? What do I need? And I literally now, I Zoom them almost every day. I never did that before, but we do a check-in with grandma and grandpa every day because I knew what I needed was to feel connected to them. And so making meaning, it's going to be really important to do it cosmically and spiritually, but really on a practical level, it's processing what am I feeling? Why am I feeling it? If there's a void or a loss, what is that loss? And is there a way I can somehow reproduce that to almost trick my brain and my emotion to feeling some sort of satisfaction in that way? Last example, and I'll kind of move on, is I really wanted to teach my child how to swim. I learned how to swim at 4 months old, and I was so excited to go to the pool and teach him how to swim. And so now I'm trying to figure out a way to get a pool big enough to put him in it in the backyard. And somehow that will fulfill my, he's excited about this.
He's excited about swimming.
That's right. That will fulfill my motherly duty to feel like I need to get him to swim. If I can't get a pool, I'll put him in the bathtub, you know. But there's a process to why I was so upset that somehow I'll miss our summer swim. And that was a 3-day process that I'll encourage us to make meaning over our emotions and over our needs and our wants, to creatively pick some new ones, if that makes sense. With that said, just want to again pass it over to my colleague about what it means for clergy and leaders.
Well, I'll share 2 things, and then if we can open up for questions and see where it goes. When Angela talked about loss, one thing I know I have lost as a pastor in this time is touch. I've lost it personally in the sense that I live by myself, and I have my dog, and I love her to death. But I can remember that the last time I actually touched a human being was when all this began. Somebody was in my office, bad day, and I gave her a hug, and then everything kind of fell apart and touch was gone. And touch for me has been important in ministry, as I think it is for many of us. A hand on somebody's shoulder who's grieving, a hand held in prayer at a bedside or with a family that's grieving. And I keep track of all this stuff, and I've done that almost 5,000 different times in my career. And now that's gone. And it leaves me empty in some sense. And it really teaches me about the importance of presence and helps me understand even more what those families are going through who can't be with their loved one right now. That's a painful experience, and thank God for those frontline people who are there. But still, it's a painful experience. The other thing I would add, on a different note, as I said, we concentrate on what we can do, even new experiences. I went to the grocery store and there was no bread to be found. So I decided I was going to make my own bread, which I've never done in my life. And I let the yeast rise and put it in there. And then when I was kneading that, I beat the crud out of it. Just beat that thing to death. And the loaf ended up being more like a brick. But if I put it in the microwave long enough, it softened up and I could chew it. So, but doing something new that you've never tried before can be a lot of fun. So that's really all I have to add in.
I appreciate that. We want to open it up to everyone else. I will just kind of end with this last thought around we're all experiencing this together, and we're all experiencing it differently, based on our social identities, where we are in the world. And so I want to acknowledge that we all have different needs, and that is okay, and that is important to name. That when you think about kind of where I'm at, even for those of us who already have mental illness, this is a whole different kind of layer of managing and coping that we can talk through if that's something we want to think about. But with that said, some of us are experiencing our liberties taken for the first time. Honestly, like this is not a normal occurrence to not be able to do, to not have. Some of us have been in systems of oppression where liberties are not a privilege for us, and so this is kind of just another layer of obstacle to deal with, right? Wherever you are in that location, it's important to acknowledge that in a positive way, like that's okay that this might be new or might be not new, and to think about how we might cope from that social identity. It's very important to really locate personally where you are, where your people are, where your history are, where identity is, and then kind of move from there. And we can talk more specifically about those things as we go forward, but that is very okay. And in mental health recovery and maintenance, that is key. So as a therapist, when I sit with you, I'm thinking a lot about all your identities first and foremost, and how that impacts what you do and how that impacts what you believe. And moments like this, that's very important for us to be able to do internally and even with others. So all I have to say. Just want to open it up. I don't know if this is where open it if there's questions or thoughts or discussion.
Exactly. Any questions out there? Just raise your hand or do a dance. I don't care. David, go ahead.
Let me see here. Unmute.
Yep, there you go.
Now I'm not. Okay, cool. One of the things which has struck me over the course of the last several weeks is, like all of us, I'm trying to keep up with my congregation and, you know, call folks. And in the first round of calls, I was able to identify individuals who seem to be struggling a little bit more than others. Now, in the second round of calling, just like with the spread of the virus, more folks are becoming more concerned. And what struck me most was the concern that I've gotten from folks is, how will I ever be able to trust to hug someone again? How am I ever going to be able to come back to church and feel comfortable again? Now, my bachelor's degree was in history, and you know, with the first person, when this happened one time, I was talking to that person about historical examples of how people emerge from, you know, things, and they picked up and went on. But now it seems to be a growing consensus among some folks, especially my older folks. So what ought I be telling them about this fear that when we do emerge from this, what's new normal going to look like, and how are they going to be able to trust that again? Thank you.
That's such an amazing question, and I want to encourage Mark. I want you to think with me theologically too about this, but I'll start with just kind of a more kind of a brain or a practical kind of science headspace, and then I want to think about spiritually. What you name to me is such the articulation of a trauma, honestly, that it's the post effects of having an event or some sort of moment that hits you and alters your reality in a painful way. And so some of us who have had chronic traumas, so like there's a way in which the world around us continually abuses or continually hurts. The way we adapt to the trauma is different than if it's a one-time car crash or one-time event. We don't know yet if this is a one-time event or if it's a chronic. And so I think a lot of the fear is normal in that way, that the body is going, I cannot place this yet so that I can start healing. So once the car crash, I can place that and I go, okay, now I can start the process of recovery. If it's chronic, as a treatment, we do something different. One thing I will say is that when I'm working with people who are in a chronic traumatic experience or an abusive situation where it's constantly happening to you, there is ways in which you have to really process your emotion, which is just a strange thing for a lot of us. Emotions are not something we are trained to think through. So for example, I struggle with anxiety myself. My partner is a sheriff, and so he's out, and I have a 7-month-old. And so the reality of us getting it is going to be really strong. And there are random bouts where I'm like, oh, I'm young, I'm not going to get it. And then there's these moments where I freak out and I think, oh my gosh, I'm going to get it and give it to my 7-month, and he won't be able to do the fevers. And I go into a panic mode. And so for me, that's when I have to stop and go, okay, what am I feeling? I'm feeling vulnerable. I'm feeling, all these emotions. And then I will talk to it with people. I mean, whoever will listen. That in and of itself just helps me get that out. It's almost like a wave, just getting that emotion out. That is priceless. I can't express how priceless it is to name my emotion, express why I'm feeling. Sometimes it's helpful to hear encouragement back. Sometimes I just need to get it out. Other tangible ways to deal with fear in and of itself, so anxiety in and of itself, a lot of times we want agency. So it's going to be like, I'm going to wear a mask for 15 months, or I'm going to clean everything. But that can turn into, paranoia in a way. And so once the trauma, I guess, is done, or once the threat is somehow, we feel like a sense of, okay, we're moving forward, really finding practical ways, whether or not they're secure or not, but practical ways for us to have agency is going to be important. That's why I think spirituality comes into play, but being aware that I need agency. That's my meaning making. me cleaning my table is one thing, but I'm really cleaning it because I need agency. I need to know that I can stop the germs from being in my house. And naming that I need agency, whether it's in a prayer or with a person, is going to be part of that help. I'll pause and kind of think, just because my child's so loud, but think about more spiritual, theological ways, and then maybe come back with some more practical ways of how we might hold fear and anxiety post-trauma.
Well, I think as a pastor, one of the first things I would do is honor their feelings and honor where they are at. Because there might well be some guilt for feeling that way. I don't know why I'm afraid. What I shouldn't have this fear, but it's okay to be afraid. It's okay to be uptight. And then I believe very much in being as authentic with people as possible. None of us know what's it's going to be like in the future, but in the body of Christ, what we can promise each other is that we will be there for each other in the ways that we can. And I think that's an important thing to let people know, that all of us are experiencing this on our own, but we are going through it together. And that togetherness, I think, is very important. And then I think Angela's absolutely right. You know, there are some people who need, you know, well, what are they doing? What can I do? And those are the places where, you know, we're working on a vaccine, we're cleaning everything. Those kind of things are very important for people to know, and to know what they can do, still the social distancing, covering themselves up. But in that situation, my first response as a pastor would be to honor their feelings and then promise them that we're in it together.
Definitely. One thing I'm thinking as you said that, which I honestly am doing for my own self because I struggle with anxiety, is the brain getting respite from the threat. And so when you're in an abusive situation or chronic, you kind of have really strong escaping skills. I think of cultural parts of being a Black American culture through Survivor. There's a lot of ways in which we might escape the threat through music, through dance, these other forms. But that is such a healthy coping skill when your threat does not go away. And so that could look very different to different people. But ways in which you can healthily avoid thinking about the pandemic, reading about it, preaching about it, praying about it. Sometimes I just act as much as I can, avoid that it's there. So that's different for different people, how much you can avoid it. But there are moments where I might just kind of, and this could feel bad, but you're just kind of like, oh, it's not in my space, right? In a safe environment. I think I want to name that all of coping skills do change when you're in the midst of grief and loss. So when I'm thinking about maintenance and health, if I'm grieving, it's a very different experience than if I'm just kind of maintaining a fear. And so I would lift up as clergy, as leaders, to acknowledge that some of us are grieving physical death, some of us are grieving just emotional, social death, that giving space to process that loss, just like we would do any other grief, is going to be really important before we say, oh, go ahead and escape and go laugh and go dance and go move. That is something that can be very hard if I'm grieving. It could be helpful if I'm grieving, but just to start with the grief and loss work first. But escaping is going to be a really healthy thing if this is going to be ongoing. And that could look
and escaping might be asking them if they've thought about turning the TV off today. Because they sit and watch CNN or Fox or MSNBC and just get wore out with it. Wore out.
Ditto.
Other questions? I want to just note an observation that I am seeing, which is all the things that you've been saying, but we're living in that liminal time, that moment we don't know. We just don't know. And so I've got search committees trying to figure out what to do when they're on the edge of deciding, but they can't bring somebody in, so everything's on hold. Trying to make decisions, lots of decisions, which we're not really sure because we know somewhat, but we don't know everything. And it almost feels like one of the things that's helpful is to help people where we can make a decision seems like taking control back. And yet that I just noticed so much struggle with all of this right now that people feel overwhelmed and they can't make the decision. It's kind of I just lift up that observation in myself as well as what I'm seeing in the rest of the church right now.
I know there was a question. If you mind me jumping on that real quick and then going to that, is that okay? When you name unknown, if I could name any kind of theology that I would love for the church to bolster as a mental health professional, is the theology of the unknown. That is the mental health world, right? The daily experience. And when something's unknown, we do a lot of things to have agency. That is a human desire and need of ours. And in moments like this where it's completely out of our control, it's like, what do you do, right? And so one thing that I will say when dealing with or thinking about unknowns is I think about the daily bread is being really present. Mindfulness is thrown around like, oh, mindfulness. But this idea of if you don't know, it's almost like give your brain a break and don't try to figure it out until you have to. So when you have to figure out how you're going to get from, across the country because you have to get somewhere, then you can read the statistics on things. But if you're not going anywhere, then don't read those statistics, right? This idea of being in the moment. So you wake up in the morning, you literally just think about your coffee and think about the report you have to write and think about the sermon you have to write. And just as much as you can be completely in that day, which is very, very difficult. But if we can encourage all the systems around us to just be in that day, when the next day comes, it'll have its own problems, but it'll also have its own daily bread, right? Well, God will give this kind of support to deal with that moment. With anxiety or with fears around unknown, it's very natural for us to go way forward, way in advance. Like, okay, in fall, are we going to have our conference? And if we do, am I going to go take this plane or that plane? And it's more important to be like, today, this is what I'm going to do, or this Sunday, this is what I need to do. You can keep your planning to, a couple days in advance as much as you can. It's just really helpful mentally in that way. And so I want to make sure that the other question was, it had.
To which Jesus had a word for us today in that mode, in the Sermon on the Mount, when he said, do not worry about tomorrow. Today's got enough trouble for you. I just want.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
As we wait for questions, and if it's okay, I just wonder how our folks here are doing in this time. In congregational leadership. I mean, there's so much new and different. I mean, how are you all experiencing what's happening in your own well-being in this time? You might go at one.
I think I saw a question either from Florida Disciples or Jay Hartley. Did I hear that? Or?
I had my hand up when we were talking about things being out of control and thinking about how the pastors can help set at least a tone that while much of life is out of control, here's the things that we're going to do to help you be safe when you come back. We're not just going to instantly come in the door and everybody hugs everybody and we're going to go back to the ways we were doing communion. We're going to baby step it back in, and we're going to encourage people to wear masks. We're going to do communion differently so that we're providing as safely as possible for you. And we're going to be a hug-free zone for a while. As much as we love each other, we're going to love each other from a distance because we respect and care about your health, and to help put as much ease as we can that it's going to be different to be church in this season, so that people will feel like they can come back and be protected as best as possible.
Yeah, I agree. I was just going to add, when you were talking about just planning 1 or 2 days out, which makes a whole lot of sense. And I'm still trying to figure out how to be a regional minister, but it seems like a lot of that job is planning very far out. Like my daily tasks today are working on the nominations team for who we're going to approve at regional assembly in the fall and stuff like that. So things like that, and working with congregations that are in search. it's tricky to know what, I mean, today's task is planning for what's going to happen 6 months from now, because if I don't and I get there in 6 months and I haven't planned, then I'm not ready. So it just feels like putting everything on hold, which maybe is the theological lesson here, is you just put everything on hold, and there's nothing that we do that is actually that life essential that it can't wait another 6 months. But I'm struggling with that a little bit, I guess.
I think you named such a real adjustment, right? And I think it's interesting you say theological kind of thought, because I mean, our structure as people of God and church is planful. That's a positive thing. That's not bad to be planful. And so it is this kind of ironic adjustment on what does it mean to be planful. And so I want to just name that, yes, that is something that I think I even struggle with now, planning out what I can do, because when I make far out plans, they have changed, and that's the frustrating part. I put all this energy into it, and then somehow it gets canceled, and you're just like, oh, now I got to start all over again. What I have been trying to do is plan the stuff that, as much as I can, the stuff that can't be changed. I don't know if that makes sense, but if it goes virtual, or if somehow we don't have it, can it be pushed out? But I think what you're naming is funny theologically, is like, what would it look like for us as people of God to just say, yeah, whenever we get up and running, we're still going to have 6 months out, like we're not going to, if we get up and running in the fall, when our thing was supposed to happen, that we don't have it planned, then we're going to give all of us 6 months out of the fall to do that thing. And what would that feel like, that we all can, be like, okay, well, we don't have to be ready or prepared. That's easier said than done based on who we are and whatnot. But it is this idea of like, what does it really mean to pause? And how we have to talk to so many people in our environment around what that looks like for them in relationship to us, right? So no main thoughts, but just, just want to acknowledge that is it's a major shift of culture that I think we're all going to have to figure out, right? And last thing, I would encourage us to do it in the moment. And so what does it look like to pause today? And that could give us some sort of word for what it looks like to pause in the fall, right? If that makes sense.
I'm also struck for the regional ministers on here. Last week, we had a conversation with a community trauma therapist, and how much this conversation resembles that common conversation. One of the things that he emphasized that I took away is the 3 things you want to do for your community is try to restore, safety, predictability, and control. Like, that'll help keep you sane, is, first make sure it's safety. And then, like, what can you do that's predictable? What can you do for your kids that they can know is going to happen later that day or later that week? And what things do you have control over? Because when you start having control over little things, it restores your sanity.
Amen to that. Has anybody re-cleaned their pantry and their closets over and over again? That is so real. What can you control in the moment? Definitely. Thank you for that.
Betsy, I'd like to ask, if I can, one of the things that you were talking about, we here in my congregation have been talking about, is what we're going to do when we reopen. And some of the things that you were just mentioning have been conversations that my church leaders have been having. Have you in Florida, have you written down some of these things, these reopening instructions? Have you made those things available to the clergy? And if so, can I have a copy, please? so I can
I will
share.
do that. I haven't done that yet. I did some things before we closed down, but I haven't taken it back to the reopening steps yet. But one of the things I did recommend with communion is not to pass trays, because you're touching everything that has been touched before you, and recommended using the prepackaged communion. And you can set it on such a way that people come forward and pick it up, or you could take a very large tong, like a barbecue tong, and pass it from that with one person only, passing that to a person. You take care of your own trash so that your deacons aren't picking that up of everybody else that has touched that. But yes, I will be doing something. I have put in my newsletter to not go back to worship until at the earliest Pentecost Sunday. So I have encouraged folks out of respect for many of our at-risk people to give us that much more time. So I think in doing the time frame as a regional minister, that has gotten a lot of the clergy off the hook who are trying to discern with their leadership, when do we go back? Do we go back the 1st of May? Do we go back? So that gives a little more time to sort out some of those details. But I'd be happy to copy you, David, when I do that.
I would appreciate that, only because my congregation, they actually led me in that. I mean, I think like a lot of us, when this thing first started, my first thought was, okay, let's have a big celebration when it's all over with. Well, then as it wears on, we realize, okay, and after those conversations that I began to have with people who were afraid, after having naming and all of that, I realized, okay, this big celebration is not going to happen. It's going to be a slow rollout and a reintroduction to things. I think what would be helpful for me is just, I mean, we thought about communion, we thought about cleaning procedures, because what I was telling my leaders the other day is, whatever we decide to do, we have to make sure we let the congregation know. You know, if you're going to have the deacons go through this particular elaborate clean of their hands rituals for things are done, you let the congregation know that we're doing that in a way that is helpful for everybody. So here in Virginia, our governor has locked us down until June 10th. So we know, unless your demonstrations of the president and all those various things begin to affect some of that, we're not likely to be back until after Pentecost anyway. But that still gives us time, and I don't want to squander the time that we've got now to make plans for when we do come back together again. So that would be really helpful. Thank you, Betsy. Appreciate that.
Thank you, David.
I think that's a great resource. It's interesting that you're bringing that up, because as I've been experiencing people within this, even having the conversation about getting back to something, reopening, people are in so many different places, and I just watch that trigger them because they're not ready to consider that. And I just want to, and so I think this is a good conversation about what can we do. Yeah. Okay.
I also want to encourage congregations to continue to do their videos in addition to doing that slow rollout, because there are going to be many that don't feel safe to come back yet. And so you're going to have a congregation that's present with you, and you're going to have a congregation that you still want to be present with that is not physically with you. And also now you've got these tools to reach out far beyond your congregation to other people that can now be a part. So don't go backwards. You know, don't stop doing what you have learned and are doing new now.
I just want to piggyback off of that. I so appreciate that in the sense of this idea of change. We know that change happens and it can transform us or it won't transform us, depending on how we allow it to impact our identity. And this, to me, I hope this transforms our congregations, that when we get back, we don't jump back to what we just normally did and keep pushing, in the sense that mentally we won't be the same. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? It's not necessarily a bad thing to have experiences together. How can our sermons play off of this idea of we are recovering from trauma for the next year, 2, 3 years? We're going to really focus on what it means to process our emotions in the face of God. And what does it mean for us to openly talk about our mental illness that is now so much deep, stronger together in a space. Not that we don't go back to normalcy. So Pentecost is a great, we want to go back to Pentecost and not avoid that. But are there some creative ways that we can acknowledge what we went through, that we're still going through, and let it transform how we, not just how we physically meet, but how we emotionally and mentally meet as well.
Yeah. 3 terms come to mind for me: restore, which is that healing process, renew, and recreate. What are we doing to be innovative and to become a new church, a new being in a new season?
I think one of the opportunities we can draw on that has happened in this time is what's happened to creation itself. As we have calmed down, mountaintops that we could never see, we can now see. And the earth is actually not shaking as much now. The earth is at rest now. And I think there's something that we can take forward about that in our own experience and then with the church as well.
Terry.
Yeah, all of this, if you saw my Easter sermon, this notion of imagining a new world had already been part of the visioning that I had laid out in my State of the Church address with the General Board in February. And reshaping and rethinking that the disruption that happens, if ever there is a time to seize the opportunity to change and do things differently. Sometimes we get comfortable and we don't have an appetite for change. We don't have a choice right now. The world to which we will move forward into is not one that we can move back into, if that makes sense. We can't go backward. We have to go forward. And I hope that the church will seize and develop a different kind of courage to imagine not only just being a new church for the sake of being a new church, but we're in a new world. And so we're going to have to think about how we show up as church in this new world, and not just be in it, but how do we help shape what it can be? And so I'm very prayerful that that will be part of our new life together. But also, one of the things that concerns me is, as we have these conversations about what will we do when we go back, is the reality that when we go back may be much further down the road than we even think now. If you look at a lot of the public health guidance, if people are saying it won't be really as safe until we have testing, adequate testing, and a treatment or vaccine. There are some people, Harvard researchers are saying it probably won't be safe till 2022 or whatever. We don't know what the financial continuing impacts will be. And so thinking ahead, I think it's really going to be important for us to manage expectations. And while we certainly need to think about what we do going forward when it becomes even plausible for us to think about returning to some form of gathering, my concern is that it will be longer than we even imagine right now, and that we're going to have to really develop some strong muscles to continue to, I love that, Angela, the theology of the unknown, the notion, I heard somebody describe it as sort of a manna mentality. Enough for today, enough just to keep things ahead. But I think we're all going to have to imagine that this might be longer. As we're doing General Assembly planning, for example, July 2021, I have no idea what people's appetites will be to even gather in that way in July. Will it be a much smaller group? There have been people who are throwing together an idea of like, oh, well, let's just have sort of in the next 6 months, a virtual General Assembly or something. But we're actually working with our conference management consultants to say, if this has to be a completely virtual event, what will that look like? So I share all the concerns that everybody has. And I guess I'm looking at the public health guidance and thinking it's not going to be as soon as we think it is. And how do we prepare ourselves for a much longer haul than even Pentecost or the summer? Colleges, universities are not sure how their new students will show up in the fall. Is it still going to be a virtual? So, and I don't say that to create additional angst. I just simply say it to say we have to level set, I think, our expectations and prepare ourselves for what may be a longer experience in the wilderness than we might currently think. It's hopeful to think, oh yeah. You know, I left Indy thinking, oh, we're going to work at home for 14 days. That was March 12th, right? So, and here we still are. So I just wanted to share that and let you know that at the general level, where, you know, many of the general ministries are already thinking about, wow, we're looking at how we're working remotely now, and maybe our whole workflow changes. Maybe we give people more flexibility about how they do their work, and what's making people feel those aspects of safety, predictability, and control. I share that with the general ministries, Jay. And so it's like those are going to be some core values as we think about, you know, our HR policies. But yeah, I just think it's going to be a longer haul. And I think we also got to be paying real close attention to public health guidance as we move forward. and work theologically around that as well. But I think it's going to be longer.
I agree with you, Terry. I think it will be longer. Anything I've put as far as time frame, I say, you know, we've got to watch what's going on with this virus, and the safety is first and foremost with the people God has entrusted in our care. So I'm definitely with you on that.
I just put a quick,
Going,
just a quick,
sorry.
I put in the chat a book called Transitions. It is phenomenal. I use it with clients. It is the psychological process of change and transformation. I encourage all of you to read it, to walk through it with your congregations, because what it does is it names exactly what Reverend Horowitz mentioned, that there is this liminal, or they call neutral zone, between beginnings and ends. And most of us jump to new beginnings when we haven't ended. So there's a psychological process to ending and grieving. And then there's this middle space that usually is most of the time. And it gives you practical things you can do psychologically that I think we can all transfer to theologically to sit in neutral zone. And so in this moment, we don't know. It's a great theology of unknown, in my opinion.
I just want to say thank you to all of you. We've come to the end of our hour. I'm sure the conversation should go on. Remember, this will be recorded and shared with others, and you are welcome, and I encourage you to share it with others. Thank you all for the conversation, and blessings be to all of you.